Every time a new era of consoles
Austino Erupto, 3 horas. Isto é sobre o quê? Geração anterior. Portes de vídeo. Ei, portes de videojogos. Eu curto de caralho essa cena.
arrives, game
Let's
devs
go.
load up on making as many cool next
Giant
generation
enemy
defining
crab.
experiences as possible. Unless you're the PS5, in which case you get nothing. And Demon Souls Remake. Everyone remembers the big early releases like Super Mario 64, Bloodborne, the original Halo, but also sometimes publishers decide, hey, we need a little extra cash. Why risk only releasing God of War Ragnarok on the PS5 when we could also put it on the PS4? The cross-generation, sometimes last-gen port, a strategy that goes back basically as far as gaming. Be it an attempt to double dip a yearly release, or realizing that more people have a Wii than a Wii U with Rodea the Sky Soldier. I'm sure you've all heard of and played Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, but have you tried the venerable Skater Man on the Game Boy Color?
Eu tinha o Tony Hawk's. Wait, pera. I got it. Eu tenho o Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. That's pretty cool. Huh? Whatever. Falar nisso. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3+4 remake, remaster, whatever. Vai sair.
Yeah, despite coming out on the Game Boy Advance as well, Activision simply could not resist the smell of money coming from kids stuck with the older hardware, leading to this becoming reality. Poor grandma's gotta get something for little Timbo, but thankfully this can go either way. Some are terrible and others decent.
Nice.
So this video goes out to all those unfortunate internetless souls stuck on the 360 while their friends were celebrating with fancy X-Bones.
Stick with 360, that's your message if you don't,
Well,
if you don't like it?
the last gen ports, the video games deemed as lesser than simply because they had lower resolution or completely lacking the Nemesis system. Bust out that dusty Wii U, I'm sure you all have. We're getting crunchy. So yo, it's Austin, and
Olá,
today
Shao.
we're gonna be...
Olha, eu há bocado tentei abrir a tua cena antes de abrir a minha cena, mas já não estavas. God damn it. Eu vi a notificação, mas distraí-me a ver um episódio de Office.
diving into the lost era of the last generation port, something you might only experience on a Nintendo Switch these days. We've got a whole lot of last gen ports to talk about today, so let's keep an eye open. All right, let's make it worldwide, because today's video has been sponsored by Gameloft in Carmen, San Diego.
Gameloft? Ele é um dos jogos da Gameloft no meu Nokia qualquer coisa.
That's right, she's back, and this time we're taking the role of Carmen as we solve puzzles, mysteries, and various capers. Newer gamers out there might not know her, but Carmen Sandiego is actually one of the oldest gaming franchises out there. Originally created in 1985 by Broderbund, it was an educational game that had you scouring the planet for international thief Carmen Sandiego. Millions of kids, including myself, grew up playing this on old PCs and had theme song brainworms. It just creeps up.
Theme song.
Well, she's back, and I think they did a good job capturing the spirit of the original.
Será que este jogo é mesmo? Porque tipo, isto é o sponsor, não é? Mas se não fosse um sponsor, o que é que será que ele diria do jogo? Será que o jogo é fixe?
Hard thinking. There's a new narrative-driven campaign as well as the retro-inspired Acme files, where they literally recreate some of those older sprites as you track down the vile crime committers. That's Villains International League of Evil, by the way. The deluxe edition also lets you chase down Carmen herself. Also, shout out to Gameloft for sending me this gift box for the game. There's a lot of effort in here with the case files and
Gameloft, insane.
There's a lot of variety when it comes to chasing down criminals, including sky gliding, QTEs, classic 80s style puzzles, and having to use clues to figure it all out. But instead of having to write it all down, the clues are stored on the side of the screen. Though you might still have to Google words people don't use anymore, like toe-headed. Haven't heard that one. I guess it's still educational. Carmen Sandiego is a cool reboot of a classic concept that's fun for everyone, be they old fans or heck, even their kids. So if you're interested in this, you can pick it up today on all major consoles, PC. Click the link today. Thanks to Gameloft for the sponsor. But for now, we're gonna go back to a previous generation so we can look at some borked-ass versions of video games. Or in some cases, maybe a bit better. Considering we're already there, I think we might as well start with some classic licensed games. Licensed games and multi-plat ports coming out on everything under the sun are as common as The Rock making a comeback these days. It'll happen even if you don't want it to.
I want your soul.
It doesn't matter the genre, superheroes, anime, movies past their prime, you know it'll release on 9+ platforms, and I live for it. Especially the janky DS ports. Previously, we looked at X-Men Origins Wolverine, the caged edition on the PlayStation 2 and Wii, which is,
That hurt, bro?
Man, tantos portes partilhados entre a PS2 e a Wii. Wii, yikes.
bad. And we also can't forget the Fantastic Four Rise of Silver Surfer, which was somehow better than the next-gen counterpart. But, like, barely. However, none of those can beat Spider-Man, whose games have swung across several generations. Movies? You can bet on Spider-Man 2 being on the
Isso nunca aconteceu.
GBA and DS. Original story, Spider-Man vs. the Kingpins got you covered on both the Genesis and Master System, for better or worse. Today, however, we're looking at a cult classic, a game that came out in a weird period between the film franchises, Spider-Man Web of Shadows. If you've never played WAS, you should. It's one of the better
E ele está a meter a música do
Activision era Spider-Man romps.
Spider-Man da
It has this
PSX.
morality system that'll affect where the story goes, and it'll change which of Spidey's friends you can call in. Yep.
Quando eu joguei o Spider-Man na PSX, aquilo era gravado, acho eu, e esta música estava fucked. Então a música, em vez de ser turururururururururururururu, como estás a ouvir, aquilo estava tipo tururururururururururu. Turururururu.
You might recognize it from the sad walk meme, which, I mean, yeah, it's perfect.
Tava
But
fucked.
it's also got the second best QTE failure in the entire series.
Gotcha.
Web of Shadows ain't the
Gravado, acho eu. Opá, olha, não sei.
tightest Spider-Man title.
É engraçado as expressões que nós usávamos na altura. Gravado. Hoje em dia já não utilizaria essa expressão, não é? Só que pronto.
But it makes up for it with a
Veio de lá de
wild
trás
story
cá para a
and
frente.
combat that's fun enough. A tight, almost 7 out of 10. I like it. However, I don't like the PlayStation 2 port. The Amazing Allies edition of Web of Shadows is a
Amazing
big old disappointment. Right off the bat, it's a 2D side-scroller, which isn't bad. But second off, they made the combat and the beat-em-up terrible.
É sim, um 2D side-scroller por si só não tem mal, mas na PlayStation 2 é um bocadinho esquisito.
It's so rough it'll have you missing combos, causing them to come to a complete halt, even though you're clearly smacking goons. That, and they made Peter way too hard to control. You're zipping around like a madman. Gone is the open-ended web swinging. In is miserable platforming.
O que eu mais gostei foi do sound file do Spidey.
It just doesn't feel right. Web of Shadows' big thing was that morality system, but with some NPCs you can actually reject
Eu
quests.
gostei da moda do Morality System. Eu gostei. Um dia tenho que voltar a jogar Mass Effect, uma vez que eu arranjei no PC e agora para eu nunca jogar, não é? Para ficar para ficar na lista da Steam.
Meaning you can skip a ton of content, meaning you'll lose the plot. Though you might want to, because I was falling asleep like 20 minutes into this. Would make sense to play this in bed though, considering this is just the PlayStation Portable version on the big screen.
Oh.
Animations look like it.
Agora que estou a perceber, está bem. Está bem, já não é
At
esquisito.
least there's some new content. The big boy version of Web of Shadows didn't have the ability to equip the amazing allies. That means you can summon people like Sandman and Galactus. Don't forget about Professor X. What in the world? You're gonna want to spam these because the bosses are absurdly difficult, like Venom with his adrenaline momentum going off. Web of Shadows Amazing Allies ain't amazing. I'd much rather play Dynasty Warriors Gundam 2 now.
Uou! Eu nem sabia que havia Dynasty Warriors de Gundam. Mas ao que parece é tão antigo que ainda lhe chamavam Dynasty Warriors antes depois do nome. Que engraçado.
For a different kind of port. Web of Shadows is an entirely different game, but this is kind of the same. Japan tends to stick with older consoles a bit longer than Western publishers, so it's
Por acaso, um Warriors game na PSP? Parece-me impressive. Espera aí. Existe assim muitos Dynasty Warrior game PSP? For realsies? Bem, se eles lançam um, lançam 30. Isso também é verdade. Damn. Isso é impressive para mim. porque tive uma PSP.
Surprised that this thing came out with the year 2009 on the box. I love me some Gundam, I love me some Dynasty Warriors, put them together and I'll stick around for way too long. This second entry promised more of the same, more robots, more destruction, more Kira crying.
2011. Pá, se calhar viram que a Vita estava a ser um flop e eles, pá, manda na PSP na mesma. Tal como ele disse há bocado da cena da Wii U e mandarem jogos para a Wii na mesma.
The PS triple flagship of this was solid. It had a mostly stable frame rate and it did its thing. The
Man.
Dynasty Warriors thing. On the PS2, it's a
Eu lembro
less
que-
good.
Eu acho que não estou maluco, mas eu acho que saiu um SingStar na Wii, tipo em 2015. Eu acho que. Eu lembro-me de ver no Corte Inglês à venda.
But still,
As
Gundam,
caixas do
take the
jogo.
enemies on screen and cut that in about half. It's got most of the content of the next-gen ports, just without some of the pizzazz. Less voice acting, no online, no trophies, which for some will be a deal breaker. When it comes to last-gen ports from this era, this is going to be the most normal kind of take.
Eu ia dizer que não sou um gajo de trophies, mas é um Dynasty Warriors game. Não há muito a acontecer. Se calhar ter uns trophies dá jeito.
See, the same game, just a little less. And don't worry, you don't need to
Para
get
jogar
motion
mais.
checked. The split-screen co-op really has that N64 fog. Ghostbusters, the complete opposite of Mecha. Well, kinda. It's like a kaiju movie at times. This classic film became a franchise that Sony thinks needed a full universe with various shows, movies, and of course, games. None of which require a Crystal Head vodka purchase. Anyways, before all that, when the third movie was just in talks and kept falling through, an official game made its way to just about every platform you can imagine.
Uou.
in 2009,
Ué, este não é o jogo que toda a gente diz que é fixe?
when the franchise was
Wait, hold on.
to just about
Caralho. Que puta, moço.
every platform you can imagine. In 2009, when the franchise was super relevant.
Nice going.
And it's pretty solid. Simply Ghostbusters by Terminal
Pois.
Reality. People like this one, and incorporated elements from the cancelled third movie script out of Raimi's.
Tinha ideia que isto é de facto o verdadeiro Ghostbusters 3, não é?
It even got a remastered port a few years back. However, this is about ports, and this clearly wasn't going to be running on the PlayStation 2 and Wii, so Atari hired Redfly Studio, had them tone everything down into a cartoon caricature, and what we got was Wii PS2 Busters, also PSP.
Would it kill him to mix in green salad?
This one features a similar gameplay loop, however, they toss it up by completely changing level structures and even ghosts you'll encounter. Capping those ghosts requires you to match movements to
Por que não-
suck them in, as opposed to the
Wait, por que não
dragging
manter o level design?
dropping from the PlayStation
Não é mais
3
trabalho.
release. It's also lacking the co-op multiplayer, which was a surprisingly fun horde mode. Not that you can even play that anymore. It's all offline, and not even the remasters brought it back. A big shame. Wii PS2
Hey, that's
Busters isn't
sad.
a terrible port by any means. It's probably got a cult following too, due to being a Wii title. The motion controls in that version really do capture the frantic feel of zapping ghosts while listening to a bunch of people yap and complain. Bonus points for its wacky
Zappin'.
art style. You know what you're getting into the second you lay eyes on the cover and see Dan
Man, olha o Bill Murray. Eu sei que ele está a apontar para o Dan, whatever.
Dan's big ass chin.
Nice of you guys to join us. You grabbed the little spud?
Mashed potatoes now.
Finally, it ain't a licensed game section without a big one, Star Wars. Millions
Yay.
of games as far as the eye can see, but if you look real close, you'll see something edgy. A little closer. There it is.
Yeah,
Star
Force
Wars: The
Unleashed.
Force Unleashed
Eu lembro disto estar na Wii também, não? Montes de
Everyone's
merdas.
favorite Soul Calibur 4 character, Star Killer. Looking at this, you know what generation we're in. We got buzz cuts and clips
Yeah.
you could easily toss together with some corn. Basically, Darth Vader's dad simulator, which is also no longer canon. This game was great. The 360
Star
and PS3
Killer.
versions of it were pretty solid looking for the time. I loved playing as Vader to start it up, even if it made you feel a little bad. Although it'll never not be funny to use force powers to launch a stormtrooper into the abyss. Unfortunately, despite its technical fun and novel concepts, the next-gen version of this hasn't held up great. The destruction physics are nice, but there's not a Dynasty Warriors amount of enemies to play with, which brings me to the PlayStation 2 and Wii version of it. They
Uh-oh.
might actually have a little more sauce. I might like them more. Developed by Chrome Studios, the people behind the cool, edgy Elijah Wood's Spyro trilogy, The Force Unleashed is a good time. The combat's a little more varied. The boss fights tend to have more depth in comparison to the HD ones. ones, but I just generally like the pacing of it all more. There's a lot less running around in large empty spectacle rooms and more star killing, even if some of that is incredibly long QTE sequences that'll restart if you fail a single prompt. The story and cutscenes are all intact, even the cool transition with the eyes. This one's cool. And in a strange twist of events, this game, which was originally stuck on an old SD console, would get a port all the way in 2022 and only to the Switch. It's of the Wii version in particular, so they brought over the motion controls. Two-player dual mode
O,
wasn't in
o
any
E não é
other
o motion
version.
controls. Peraí, o E não é os motion controls, porque eu já sabes que eu gosto muito. O E foi porque aquilo parecia que estava a correr a um FPS.
Unless you
Com
really
sorte.
want those HD edgelord textures, this might be the one I'd recommend. Then we got Star Wars The Force Unleashed for the Nintendo DS.
Eu quando jogo um videojogo não quero vomitar, meu, por estar mal disposto.
I expected worse. This
Eu
is
fico tipo car sick quando um jogo está a rodar assim.
a completely different game, which makes sense considering it's on the DS and there's 5 different SKUs for TFU. It's not bad, it's not great, definitely nostalgic, and probably the next step for broody 10-year-olds after Shadow the Hedgehog. Damn. Speaking of, there's a lot, like a whole lot. In fact, I might want to make a video about this specifically, but in the 2000s, it was super common for a bunch of releases of the same game to be totally different despite having the same exact box art.
Ah, sim.
For example, Sonic Unleashed, a game we've covered
Yeah,
to
isto na
death in the
PS2, na Wii e na PS3 é diferente.
past, but has had multiple versions that were completely different. One Sonic Team, the other Dimps. They were decent alternatives and almost companions to
Wait, o Sonic Generations fez isto? Só que ninguém sabe, porque ninguém teve uma 3DS. Mas eu tive uma 3DS. E o Sonic Generations da 3DS. Porquê que eu tenho todos os Sonic Generations? Eu nem sequer sou um Sonic Generations fan. Jesus.
the HD Bloom.
Hold on, peraí, deixa-me só provar que é verdade. Porquê que eu tenho esta merda? Isto foi fixe. Isto aconteceu, o mesmo aconteceu. Acho que ele vai falar. Ele tem que falar de Sonic Generations. É que este jogo não tem nada a ver com o Sonic Generations. Ou não é nada a ver, mas é mais tipo. Este jogo passas em tipo, sei lá, 4 horas? Acho que os levels. Eu acho que os níveis são todos diferentes. Eu só joguei uma vez.
The flagship Werehog, though, with way less content, no hub worlds to explore, less music, and way less chili dog stages, though that might be okay. Sonic Unleashed is
Não te recordas porque. Opa. Fora de. Eu não sei quem é que haveria de jogar este jogo.
one of the most perfect examples
Estupidez.
of an entirely different
Sim,
last
estou a chamar-me estúpido. Mas vocês já sabiam. É por isso que vocês vêm aqui, para ver a minha estupidez, não é?
generation port. It's hardly a port, it's just a different game. You'll also see this a
Como é
lot
que era?
with good old James
The Idiot's
Bond
on!
007. When Electronic Arts was
Wait,
holding
porquê que ele não falou de Generations? Podia ter falado.
onto the James Bond video game license, you'd be remiss to see a game not on every
calhar porque não
platform
sabe.
imaginable. Nightfire, one of my
Não o
favorites, had a
culpava se não
different
soubesse.
PC port made by Gearbox on the Half-Life 1 engine. You ever play Everything or Nothing on the Game Boy Advance? How about the two totally different takes on The World Is Not Enough? Or, if we move over to one of the worst Bond
Aquilo
films,
Denzel
and I'm
Washington?
not talking about Die Another Day, Quantum of Solace. The movie with a script that got hackneyed together a few hours before the writer's strike of 07. Quality ahead. Well, around the same time,
Oh
EA
no,
lost the
Writer's Strike. Tu lembras disso, dos Writer's Strikes?
since Activision picked it up,
Não
and
correu nada
this would
bem.
be their first published game. Simply Quantum of Solace. They went all out. Not one, not two, but 3 different versions of Danny Craig's self-described shit show. Actually saw this
Vocês
success in
fariam.
series
Vocês acham que poderia haver um Writer's Strike? Writer's Strike, agora que estamos na era do chat GPT?
had in the past, and for the big blockbuster, they were going to let it rip across every platform. DS, PC, PS2, PS3, Wii, 360. Not the PSP though. And they did. With review
E aí,
scores.
uou. E se eu perguntasse ao chat GPT esta pergunta? Seria funny.
It's not that far off from the film. The 7th gen versions of Quas, which included the Wii for once, can only be described as Call of Bond Quantum of War. The shooting, the explosions, the set pieces, all of it feels ripped straight out of Call of Duty, which I guess makes sense considering it was developed by
Treyarch.
Treyarch. Just add in the third-person perspective when you go into cover so you can see Daniel Craig's perfectly sculpted PS3 face.
Nice.
It's beautiful. Also, don't forget some of the worst action choreography you'll ever see in a big AAA shooter.
Isto é considerado um big AAA shooter?
Flip over to the PlayStation 2 and you'll get, well, a James Bond game. This one's got all the stuff you'd expect from Bond post-GoldenEye, from tightly scripted chase sequences, big shootouts, to the stealth infiltration.
Yo, eu não sei quanto a vocês, mas vocês alguma vez jogaram um jogo de James Bond? Eu nunca joguei.
Missions.
Nem o da
Seriously, the only
N64.
thing that's missing are driving sequences. Guess you gotta get 007 Racing for that. Don't
007.
though. Quantum of Solace for the PlayStation 2 is actually the highest reviewed one of these, which makes sense when you see
Jogaste? Eu não joguei
that
nada.
it was developed
Talvez,
by
talvez tenha jogado qualquer coisa nas lojas de videojogos, mas não me lembro de nada. Se foi o facto, não me lembro de nada.
Eurocom, who also created Nightfire and a slew of other bangers from this era, and also 007 Legends, but we're not going to talk about that. This one sticks to the third person the entire time, which works better than the janky swapping of perspectives on the big boy consoles, and also helps sell the idea that you're Bond with his gorgeous PS2 face. Both versions of this game only loosely follow the story because it sucks and instead leans
Parece eu a apontar.
more to Casino Royale for a majority of the levels. A couple of the layouts were changed, some were removed, but the PS2 version also has its own exclusives and perks. In a world where most James Bond video games are okay to
Tá num
good,
controller.
Quantum of
Faz
Solace
sentido.
PS2 is pretty okay. Bonus points for this run cycle. Look at him go. The Solace was just a downscale.
Ok.
360 port, which
referência
was
não
not
vai.
typically
Pimba.
the case, which is also what happened with Dead Rising. Man, Dead Rising's a classic for a reason. There's a lot of fun to be had.
No outro dia pensei no Dead Rising, que há um jogo que eu quero voltar a jogar das mecânicas mais importantes é roubada do Dead Rising.
Messing around in a mall, donning a surfbot head and fighting a Dynasty
Fuck, é um
Warriors
Metroidvania
map
brasileiro,
zombies.
esqueci-me.
This release was a technical showcase for the 360 when it came out in 2006, so when you tell me that Capcom was gonna be porting this to the Nintendo Wii, the console with a top resolution of 480p, I straight up didn't believe it. Enter Dead Rising Chop Till You Drop, the
Whoa.
Wii exclusive port of Dead Rising. And it's fine. I don't think it could ever reach the heights of the HD version, but it's still got a lot of charm. It's just not fully unscathed. The in-game cinematics were swapped out for pre-rendered videos, which
Yeah.
unfortunately means no more Frank looking super cool during cutscenes.
Is your ride reliable?
Absolutely. That's how I plan on getting out of here.
Sorry,
Cool.
I don't have time for poor people.
You
Is that Mega
lose the
Man?
Dynasty Warriors 6 and are greeted with a Dynasty Warriors 2 amount of zombies on the screen. Real-time base loops were replaced with a simple mission structure. A lot of the elements are simplified. That's just scratching the
Oh, tiraram a mecânica principal de Dead Rising?
surface of changes, though. I just wish they didn't remove the camera. Considering Frank West, a journalist who covered wars, and defeated Dr. Doom, is thematically doing that in the original game, its removal takes out a ton of the charm. You'd think that the camera would be a shoo-in mechanic with the Wiimote, but I guess not. Look, I'm just saying it's crazy we
Damn.
didn't get this or Pokemon Snap on the Wii.
That
It
sucks.
just made sense. Speaking of pointing and shooting, Chop Till You Drop was overhauled to focus on the guns versus the improvised melee weaponry. Parasols, shopping carts, and most melee weapons still exist, but you can only carry one at a time, meaning they really want you to point and click out the screen with the guns.
Ah, por
Honestly,
causa
it just
no
kinda feels
Wii.
like a mashup of the Resident Evil 4 Wii port and Dead Rising, and it's something that'll probably never get remade in any way, especially not with its new remaster. Dead Rising Chop Till You Drop may not be worth playing, but it is kind of a neat and cheap relic. Kind of like Ubisoft. Okay, maybe not neat, low-hanging fruit, but they do seem to be a relic of the past at this point. Ubisoft was no stranger to multi-generational ports on
Sem dúvida.
consoles.
Eu não joguei, mas gostaria muito de jogar por causa do pointy. Pá, olha, opa, é assim, ao menos tenho pointy com este comando. Posso fazer, não é? Whatever. Não é a mesma coisa.
Prince of Persia, The
Mas é
Forgotten
quase.
Sands, a game with 4 completely different
Tá perto,
releases,
tá
the
perto.
best being on the Wii. Same thing happened with Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter. However, I gotta talk about Splinter Cell Double Agent. Now look, we've never talked about Splinter Cell on this channel, which sucks because some of these games are awesome. Chaos Theory and Pandora Tomorrow are 2 of the coolest stealth action games ever and perfect jumping off points for
Pandora?
the genre. Now, Double Agent, it's okay. As per usual with Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, you do a lot of sneaking around using tech to take out enemies.
Sabem o que é que eu devia fazer? Jogar um jogo Terry Bad. gotta be
hacking
fazer
and
isso.
complete objectives. Typical
Very
scene
bad
fishing
funny.
stuff. However, the 360
Funny
Double
bad.
Agent takes on a lot of those early console technical woes. Grimy, shiny surfaces, frame rates that plummet, pop-ins, and well, it was pretty at the time. This lighting was so good back then, alright? They made a really weird choice to not include a HUD, which meant you were stuck looking at the color-changing light on Sam's back to see if you were hidden or not. Kinda reminds me of Dead Space. I was never a fan of games trying the HUD-less approach, but luckily, the port of this to the original Xbox did. Created by Ubisoft Montreal, the creators of the original Splinter Cell and Chaos Theory, this port might be better than the 360 one. Not that that's bad, it just doesn't have all of the sauce. The story is conveyed better, the mission directives make more sense. Heck, the level design is way tighter, and there's lots of ways to do objectives. Like, look, it's just some good classic Splinter Cell. No fancy stuff. What do you want me to say? Strangely, while both takes on Double Agent have a similar beginning and middle, they start to deviate in the third mission, leading to a completely different ending. A lot of fans call the 360 release version 1, with the original Xbox port being V2, and this actually matters because the next sequel, Conviction, picks up from the 360 release. This is a rare case where the same game is worth playing 2 times due to the fact that they're both decent and different enough to warrant another go. Maybe one of these days Ubisoft will fill the Sam Fisher-shaped hole in all of our hearts, but I'm not counting on it. Maybe next time they'll put his iconic goggles on the cover instead of a big bald head walking away from explosions.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this guy. He thinks he's so cool. Kinda is though. Next up, good ports. And honestly, it's not that common. You see,
Mano, o que é que eu vi que era um gajo a virar as costas para uma explosão? Acho que foi o Commando. Ainda me lembro quando convidei o Raul para ver o Commando comigo.
games coming to consoles with fraction of
E
the
depois
power
nada.
of their big boy counterparts, and most of the time it just doesn't work. However, sometimes with the right team you can pull it off. Such was the case with all the Wii versions of Call of Duty. I'm not sure why they targeted it for any other reason besides money, but
Não é what? Tu respondeste. Ei, isso era boa ideia. Até hoje.
Activision sure wanted to make Modern Warfare work on the Wii. And these weren't just simple ports either. They went full waggle, added some extra features, and made the generation's biggest first-person shooter franchise available in the retirement home. The first true modern Call of Duty on the Wii was Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare Reflex Edition. A mouthful, I know, but they were just letting you know what you were getting into. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, 2 years after it released on a worse console. Old Jimmy was already playing the sequel. Now, a lot of people online swear by this control scheme, using the nunchuck and Wiimote. Maybe not for me. I can use little gyro assistants like with Splatoon, but still. At the end of the day, this was just the same as the 360 version, but with worse graphics. A pretty impressive feat, and perfect for the kiddos craving the duty without having to beg their parents to splurge on a new console. There was even multiplayer. That includes servers being up all the way into 2023. I have no idea who was out there playing this online in the 2020s, but hey, good on them for keeping it up for so long. Moving ahead a bit, a ton of AAA games from the 8th generation jump suffered from ports. Things that were sent straight into the frame rate dimension, never to return. However, GameWorks' The Evil Within did not. This horror cult classic directed by Shinji Mikami ran perfectly fine on the PlayStation 3, basically the exact same game. Good job. Titanfall 1 had a similar path. The porting legends over at Bluepoint took this Source Engine ran title and slapped it onto aging hardware and made it work. According to an interview with Eurogamer, they had to replace certain aspects.
Wait. Substituíram tudo. Stuffed in a streaming system and compressed the crap out of the assets to make it fit on a DVD. Yeah, we're not running the vanilla source renderer. Ha ha ha.
So the engine in order to get it running, and it doesn't look as good, but most people aren't going to be able to tell. Well, until you had to interact with the ancient 360 hard drive and GUI. I don't think the standard 20 gig hard drive is going to hold it. Finally, Wolfenstein's second reboot of the generation, The New Order, is a modern classic. During a time when most first-person shooters were skimping out on the single player in favor of multiplayer only,
Alguém jogou isto? É que eu Caguei.
a 12-hour-long campaign and threw that online in the trash. The gall of machine games. Thankfully, it was both critically and commercially successful, and it still runs great on older hardware, only really dipping when a dumb amount of guns are firing on the screen. Around this time, we were slowly starting to favor good PC ports again, so to see something like this pull it off without much of a difference at all is great. It's just Wolfenstein, with a side of long loading times, icky textures, and if you're on the 360, 4 full discs for installation,
Yeppa.
which means the New Order joins the ranks of LA Noire and Lost Odyssey, a very exclusive club. Now for the opposite. What happens when a dev tries to squeeze out all the juice of an old console they can and they can't quite make it work? Well, you get the bad ports, which means Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 for the PlayStation 1. That's
Wow!
over 2 years
Eles
after the
tentaram isso?
PS2. If there was a will, there was a way, and somehow the PlayStation 1 found a way. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 ain't your classic style THPS. It's the first time they threw an open-ended mission structure into the mix, having you interact with NPCs and get info dumped dumb problems
Oh,
that
yeah.
only you can solve with the power of sick tricks. Sometimes funny, other times dated, but usually fully
Ao contrário do que o pessoal possa achar, eu sou um Tony Hawk 2 fan. Não é a franchise toda, ok?
voice acted, even if they weren't professionals.
What? My partner's in trouble. Somebody's got to
Encontrar Sam Max deve ser o Adventure Game, não é? Quer dizer, se calhar não há mais nada que não Adventure Games, não é? Para Sam Max.
help him. Don't just stand there. Do something.
It's fun. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 is fun. Big freaking surprise here. I like my Hawk with a 2-minute timer, but still, I guess we're gonna be seeing this in a few months in HD though.
Sete
However,
disquetes é
what happens if you
insane.
take that game,
Cada uma delas não era tipo 10 megas, 9 megas, 8 megas, já não sei quanto. É 8 megas, não é?
strip out a majority of what I just said and slap it back in an older engine? What you get is Pro Skater 4, but worse in every way. It's bad, even if they did their best to call back to the originals. The frame rates are abysmal. It's a common trend here. That and the levels were clearly not meant for the weightier movement. The PlayStation 1 sure had a hard time rendering these more hilly stages. The texture warping's off the charts. Skating through one of these areas for a single minute gives you the impression that they've cut out a lot. Entire chunks are missing, and it feels like they ripped
Yikes.
the 4 out of Skater 4. NPCs, non-existent. Just giant tokens
Damn, vais fazer isso em vez de ir ao GOG?
that allow you to play goals. Turns out Tony
Eu
Hawk's
devo ter
Pro
para aí
Skater
um ou
5's
dois
giant
Sam
lifeless
Max
perks
no
were an
GOG.
homage. Usually Vicarious
Talvez.
Visions does a
Ou é no
bang-up
Humble
job with
Bumble.
these
Acho que é no
types of
Humble
ports,
Bumble
including on
Bumble.
the Game Boy Advance, but unfortunately, this time wasn't enough. Burnout Legends is a port and maybe demake of the awesome Burnout 3 Takedown, and it does a great job of maintaining that on Sony's old
Eu acho que só joguei o Dominator.
It's like a nut.
yearly checkup for your PSP battery. Legends was a lot of fun while sitting on the school bus. However, what happens when you take this port slash demake and then port it to an even weaker console? Burnout
Please no go.
Legends on the Nintendo DS.
Oh no. Why?
My God. Okay, maybe we're skirting the rules a bit, considering the PlayStation Portable and DS were technically adjacent gens, but the hardware differences are so vast. The rare occasions where we'd get a release on both usually gave us devastating results. Developed by Visual Impact, who've done a bunch of portable demakes, Burnout Legends ain't it. If playing the PSP version was like Hot Wheels, this one's like a great value brand. And it kind of looks like it too. Look at these 20 beautiful
Epá,
polygons.
faz lembrar os portes de jogos, ou faz lembrar um jogo de carros que tivesse saído tipo no Nokia 6600 ou assim. Epá, isto é um bocadinho para o depress. Não tens no GOG?
Bem,
Será que tem aqui alguma coisa? Eu posso instalar o GTA V Enhanced? Não é suposto pagar? Pensava que se pagava. Se calhar instalas e depois quando entras ele diz assim: by the way, para jogar tens que dar 10 euros, não sei. Eu tenho o Serious Sam? Quando é que isso aconteceu? Linux server? What the fuck is this? Depois de instalar e nem deixa, não deixa desligar o jogo enquanto não pagares. What the fuck, man? Dismiss. Eu ouvi dizer que o Enhanced é só tipo, tem um carro novo, caralho. E é se queres.
Kind of dig them, actually. Would love to see D. Craig's face in this engine. The problem is, it just plays horribly. You've got a weird swerve whenever you turn that feels janky, and the camera follows suit. It looks bizarre. Listen, there's a ton of other DS racers out there like Asphalt, Need for Speed, or heck, even Mario Kart DS. And again, with those, you don't get crash mode with its 4 cars.
A música parece Driver.
If this was your first exposure
Wait.
to Burnout, I feel sorry for
Se
you.
calhar até é mesmo Driver. E ele trocou a
Marks 2,
música.
We just talked about you. Let's do it again, but for the PlayStation 2. Developed by A2M, the people behind Dead by Snoopy's Great Adventure. How do you take a PlayStation 3 game, slap it on the PlayStation 2, and have it run? Easy. You slap it in the first game's engine. Tony Hawk learned them well. I'm gonna be repeating myself here. The frame rate's terrible. It's so freaking blurry. It's like I'm running that adaptive resolution in Xenoblade 2, but the color palette looks like a hodgepodge of negative saturation. To top it off, we got the N64 fog, though it's pretty funny to see things pop in rapidly while flying. Thankfully, it's still got a lot of fun stuff in the open world. It's
Well,
not
well,
bad,
well.
Just, well, the differences are stark. Saint? Wait, one more bad port. It's a game that a lot of people don't like in the first place. Watch Dogs. This was a huge deal during the pre-release marketing, so
Mano.
much so that it's led to a massive distrust from E3's
Vocês lembram-se quando Watch Dogs era suposto. É tipo, marketed como a próxima. Como é que era? A próxima vinda de Cristo? Mas é marketed só, porque depois. Se perguntasse a qualquer pessoa, ninguém curtiu o jogo. Ninguém quis saber do jogo. Antigamente jogávamos a meio FPS e não nos queixávamos. Fala por ti.
style game trailers. I'm not like sure if this technically qualifies as previous gen, but I'm gonna say it
Verdadeiro
anyway.
scam.
Despite coming out on PC, PS3, 4, 360, and the Bone, the worst version of Watch Dogs is on the Wii U, and it's not even close. Heck, they even missed the launch window with it coming out in November of 2014, 2 full years after that console hit store shelves. All
Si,
hype
senor.
gone, the game already ripped apart by gamers and press, and on a console with a massive gimmick that not many people bought. Watch Dogs for the Wii U in its barely 20 FPS glory. Somehow this thing ran even worse than the 360 and PS3 versions, and that's impressive. I was willing to give the benefit of the doubt, thinking it was potentially running 2 instances of the game because of the gamepad, but no, it's just a basic map. At least when it isn't yelling at you to look
Isso é
at the
90% dos
TV.
portos
It's a
da
massive
Wii U.
shame too, because Watch Dogs does have some fun and interesting moments. It just requires the frames to not shit the bed, causing inputs to start lagging while you're trying to escape the police, and it feels terrible. The audio sounds like it was
Good shit.
compressed to high hell, like a 3DS or Vita port, but this was on a disc with 25 gigabyte capacity. It got graphically axed, even in comparison to the PlayStation 3. It's so jagged looking. We got flickering, texture popping, the freaking works, to where it feels like I'm playing some knockoff iPad GTA clone. I guess at some point, Ubisoft just cut their losses with the Wii U, didn't attempt to clean up the port, and just threw it out into the wild months after the hype train. Wii U gamers deserved better. I should know because I waited in line overnight in the cold to get one. I didn't need to, no one showed up, but Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed sure was good. Now that's a decent port. It supports 5 players.
Olha, eu só não deram recall do jogo porque ninguém queria saber do Watch Dogs, né? Saudades do... Olha, eu acho que o pessoal já se esqueceu, mas... Quando o Cyberpunk 2077 saiu, aquilo levou recall na versão da PS4, pelo menos.
Yo, how many Wii U exclusives do we got left? Asterisk good ones? Nintendo Land, I guess? Because no one cares about Amiibo Festival.
It feels great to bring the whole family together.
One last game for the day, and I think it's something a ton of people care about. Terrible timing on my part, but we're about to talk about Monolith Productions, a studio that just got shuttered by Warner Brothers. Easily one of the biggest casualties in recent memory, and a stupid decision. Turns out making a fantastic game will also get your studio shuttered. But before they were gone, they were responsible for 2 of the most noteworthy Tolkien and Lord of the Rings licensed games out there.
Sim, aqui é, pá.
Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor. Lord of the Rings.
Se faz lembrar que tenho que jogar o Shadow of Mordor. Já está para aí no backlog para aí há 3 anos.
We've never been on short supply. Seriously, when you look at just the PlayStation 2 and onwards, there's been about 40.
Peraí. Eles tentaram lançar o Shadow of Mordor Noutras consolas?
game
Eu nem
releases in
soube.
just 25 years. That's a lot. So many that someone should cover them all.
Toda a gente sabe que jogos da CD Projekt Red só estão prontos 6 meses após saírem. Sim, mas o jogo levar recall é uma coisa que eu acho até que é inédito. Ou seja, aquilo era incrível. Aquilo não é estar. Como é que se diz? Não é não estar preparado. Aquilo é estar incrivelmente mau. Ao ponto de. Não é? Tipo, praticamente o único jogo recall que alguma vez saiu.
All one day. Not me though. That's too much.
Vocês lembram só um exemplo de algum jogo que tenha sido recalled?
Bugs Lord of the Rings. Yeah, maybe not. We've had a ton of good ones like the movie tie-ins. I think me and 10 people love War in the North. And then there's stinkers like Gollum and Aragorn's Quest.
Also, olá, Vitor, estás bom?
But there really was nothing quite like Shadow of Mordor. For the PlayStation 3.
O Concorde não foi recalled. O Concorde foi cancelado. Aquilo era um live service, não é? Ah, mas eles venderam, não é? Mas não é a mesma coisa.
Shadow of Mordor is, without any hesitation, a pretty freaking good game, even if my editor doesn't think so. It's a marriage
Gollum?
of Assassin's Creed with Arkham
Também não foi.
combat that
Não
came
foi. Nenhum
together
desses
with
foi
the middle
recall. É a pior parte, meu.
Earth license to give me something that was just a blast to play and run around in. It has this dark and oppressive atmosphere, easily one of the most contrasting differences between it and the other Frodoian counterparts. All of this is sewn together with the ever popular, always mentioned Warner Brothers pre-discovery patented trademark Nemesis system. You play as Talion, who gets killed after watching his own family get killed, decides, man, I really hate orcs, teams up with the wraith of an elf, and goes full murder hawk on hierarchies full of orcs. Ones with weaknesses to exploit, fun stealth gameplay opportunities, and more
Fuck,
shit
man.
talking than you can imagine.
You're not quite so fearsome in the flesh. Rotting, fetid flesh, I might add.
Or you'd fail and
Eu devia jogar. O problema é que eu não tenho. Nos únicos momentos em que me apetece jogar, em vez de jogar, vejo vídeos sobre jogos.
get promoted up the ranks. It's Nemesis because the orcs you slay and get slaughtered by remember you, how you killed their buddies, and they'll try to buff themselves up to prevent it from happening again. Maybe it's a bit
Poison.
archaic by 2025 standards, but the execution back then was astonishing. Shadow of Mordor is a great early showcase of the power that the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One could pump out. Then enter Warner Brothers again. They weren't content patenting mechanics, they wanted that big last gen bag of money, meaning yes,
Grande
it's time for the
galumbas.
power of the cell. Two consoles with 1/16 the RAM and over
Tenho
8
calor,
years
deixa-me
of
tirar a
technical
manta de cima de mim.
differences. Porting this was gonna be a toughie. So tough, they'd come out 2 months later. The result?
Estou desmantado. Ei, que esta merda!
Yeah, that's about what I expected. Maybe this should have stayed in the vault. I mean, look, it's great that people who can't afford newer consoles would get the opportunity to embark on the Tolkien-inspired quest for revenge, but this has got to be one of the crunchiest looking
Eia,
games
pá.
I've ever seen. Textures popping in all over the place, including in the menu. Y'all like polygons? Here's a few. The sheer amount of nonsense on screen is wild.
Eia,
Almost like a
pá.
console with half a gig of RAM can't and shouldn't run this. The greasy, bloomy Vaseline look of the 7th generation of consoles always, well, was a look, but it's never been worse than this.
Isto é na
This thing would've
PS2?
exploded, like for real. Listen to this bad boy. It's like a jet engine. We got screen tearing, audio
Olha.
stuttering, 13
Se calhar foi porque eles ainda não tinham tido a ideia de fazer isso.
frames a second, and don't forget compressed
Ei, isso é uma
audio.
coisa que se pode fazer. Não, mas o Cyberpunk estava pior que
Truly a
isto.
technical marvel that Monolith was able to get this running on hardware created in 2005, but running
Okay,
this
that's fine.
poorly during combat just ain't it. Good luck doing any counters or parries when you're playing what amounts to a slideshow of mud and swords. Good luck remembering any information you got from the pause menu because it takes 10 plus seconds to load back in every time. All of the cutscenes are ugly renders of the PlayStation 4 versions, and that makes transitions like stealth kissing your wife at the beginning
Kiss your
super
wife in
jarring.
stealth.
And to top it all off, remember how I was just glazing the Nemesis system? The
Até o
defining feature
FM25 foi
brought up in
cancelado.
every
Mas uma
review
coisa é ser
from now
cancelado,
to the
outra coisa é ser
time.
recall.
Well, in order to get this thing to
Tu para seres recall tens que ter sido lançado primeiro.
run at all, they just took it out. Like, It's just gone, non-existent. Sure, there's still orcs to fight who are named, but the whole nemesis part of the name simply doesn't happen. There's not a changing hierarchy. People aren't coming for revenge. There's just a bunch of dummies with 0 object permanence, like my cats. It's a huge shame because this system single-handedly keeps the combat from getting too stale, and its absence leaves us with a game that frankly shouldn't exist. This one's gone a bit under the radar. It's hard to
tá
find
bom.
any proper review publications tackling this port.
Aí, pá,
It's at this point,
vocês jogaram Batman, não jogaram? É porque este jogo tem o mesmo sistema de combate. Então tu vês o gajo a dar sliding e eu estou tipo, foda-se.
one of the last bastions of a long-lost era. The last
Sliding
gen
para os
port
inimigos.
doesn't happen nearly as much these days outside of
Mas na
third-party
PlayStation
Switch
2.
releases, and seeing something so drastically different
Ei lá,
probably
aí que é a
never
versão
gonna
da
be a mainstay
Switch.
of gaming ever again. I do recommend you try Shadow of Mordor, just not this version. Seriously, my PlayStation 3 is about to explode. Someone help! So,
Ah, é na
yeah,
PS3, ok.
the lost era of last generation video game ports and an
Aw.
update for anyone to shake a stick at. There's obviously going to be way too many of these to keep track of, so I decided to stick with the more notable ones, and hopefully I got most of them. Let me know some more down in the comments. Also, if you like today's video, check out the sponsor, Carmen Sandiego.
Generations não deve estar porque aquilo era da PS3, não era?
There you go. If you'd like to support
Já é
us
duas
directly, head
gerações
on over to
atrás.
Patreon, where you can join our backers, gain access to the Discord, and help us keep the ball rolling. Buy a
Da
t-shirt
PS4.
over at the
Da
Pixel
PS4 não é que
Empire, and I
desculpa.
know you've all heard
Acho que é
this
PS3.
before, but gotta do the thing. Anyways,
Eu lembro de jogar isto num computador no, pá, aí no
This is
2010.
the last video before we touch base with the Justice League, which means, yes, the next time you see me, I'll be having full brain rot. Thank you all so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to Alfred Correa.
Obrigado,
Ben
obrigado,
Oswald,
obrigado. Muito bem, muito bem.
Blake Thomas,
Olha, eu gosto muito do Austino.
Charles
Não
Rosner,
esqueçam de
Cheeks,
fazer
Clark
like e
Fox,
subscribe
Chris
ao
Shelton, DX
Austino
Buster,
e ao
Dylan
Europa.
Snyder, Fragile Traveler,